Face better today? Last week it was kind of dark, but Keith Cribbs has been working tirelessly caring for the electricity in the building. And so he has been not only handling things in the sanctuary, but he put up spotlights. So that, yeah, you can't help but see me now. But thank you to Keith and to all the men who have been working tirelessly in our building. Well, before I begin, I want to give credit to Dr. A.J. Levine, who's an Orthodox Jew who teaches New Testament at Vanderbilt University and Seminary. She's written a book about short stories told by Jesus, and the ideas for today in interpreting this parable, or explaining this parable, come mostly from her. Well, every 10 years, our national government takes a census. And the census counts the number of people living in the United States. The census also counts where people live, along with a variety of pieces of information. Ideally, census information helps our national government make timely and much-needed laws. But the census raises a number of issues. For instance, who gets counted? Do we count homeless people? Do we count everyone within our national borders, or do we count only those who are card-carrying citizens? Do we count children or just adults? Do we count all the racial and ethnic nationalities? Do we include urban and rural poor in our counts? These issues have been debated since the first census in 1790, when slaves, immigrants, women, and the homeless were counted differently than land-owning white males. Who counts? What lives matter? Who do we decide doesn't count? Those are the questions we have been struggling with since our nation was founded. Now, Jesus told a story that we call the story of the prodigal son. It goes like this. A man had two sons. The youngest came to him asking for his share of the inheritance. Now, excuse me, while we find that appalling today, in the first century, it was not an uncommon practice. The oldest son would inherit the bulk of the father's property. The other sons inherited half of what the oldest son did, and many of the younger sons would ask for their inheritance early so that they could get away from their older brother and their father's thumbprint upon their lives. The father gave the younger son his inheritance. The youngest son moved away and spent the money, I love it, dissolute living, partying. When the money was gone and a famine hit the region, the young man went to work feeding pigs. His wages were low, he was hungry, and he really was not having any fun at all. So he remembered that his father paid his hired hands very well, and they never went hungry, even had enough to have a good time every now and then. So he decided to go home and ask his father for a job as one of the hired hands. Now, as the son walked down the road toward his father's home, the father saw him and ran out to meet him. The son had rehearsed what he would say to his father. Father, I've sinned against God and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands. But the father paid absolutely no attention to that speech. Instead, he called a slave to bring out the best robe, kill the fatted calf, and plan a party for this youngest son. Now later, as the party was going on, the oldest son was walking home from another long day working in the fields. I'm making noises. I don't like that. Let's try that. He heard the party and asked somebody, so what's going on? Then he found out that his younger brother had returned and his father was throwing him a party, and the older son was angry. He refused to participate. The father came and tried to soothe his anger, but was unsuccessful. The father explained it by saying that the younger brother had been lost to them, now was found. He was dead and now he was alive. Now, we often interpret this story by saying that the father is God and the prodigal son is all of the sinners. And we get upset with the oldest son for not being willing to welcome the repentant sinner back into God's good grace. Heard that interpretation before? Like almost every time you've heard this story? Yeah, me too. Anybody have a problem with that? Me too. So when do we do that? We're not using Jesus' parables the way he intended for us to use them. Jesus told stories not to be interpreted as metaphors or allegories, but stories about real-life situations that would cause us to think, to reflect, to squirm, and perhaps change some of the ways we act. Jesus told the stories to get us to think about how we might live our lives in different ways that were a little bit more faithful than we had been before. So rather than call the parable the story of the prodigal son, perhaps we should call it the story of the man who had two sons. When the youngest son ran off to play and to party, the father spent his time thinking about that younger son. In fact, I've heard the stories, and I've probably preached them also, about the father hanging out at the front window, keeping a watch out just in case the younger son might come down the road. And no doubt the father spent a lot of his time worrying about that son. The older son stayed home quietly, working hard and doing the right thing, and even so, the father didn't have time to compliment the older son. He spent all of his time worrying about the younger son. And it's entirely possible that over supper he would worry out loud, and the oldest son had to listen repeatedly about this poor lost younger son. Now that could be me projecting my experience with my mother and my oldest sister, but you never know. Now when the younger son returned, the father threw a lavish party and forgot to invite the oldest son. Here he was, out working in the field, working hard, ensuring that his father's legacy is intact, and when the father decided to throw a party for this ne'er-do-well younger son, he didn't take the time to inform the oldest son and invite him to the party. He had time to hire a caterer, he had time to get a band, but he didn't think to invite the oldest son. No wonder he was angry. He forgot that he had two sons. And by forgetting the oldest son, the father sent a very loud and clear message in that moment that to him, the oldest son did not count. Now, some of us have been the forgotten one in the story, and if that's so, yeah, we have a right to be angry. But we also have to think about how we're going to move past the anger to forgiveness, to forgive those who forgot. And until we learn to forgive those who forgot, our lives will never quite be at peace. So forgiveness is the first question, but the bigger question is, who have we in our lives forgotten to count? Who in our families? Who in our communities? Who in our church? Who in our nation have we forgotten to remember? Who have we overlooked? Who have we intentionally or unintentionally told to them they don't count to us? Every week, people who are or were here as members for a long time, hardworking but quiet pillars of our congregation, are absent. How many of us actually notice when a person that we're accustomed to seeing isn't here for a week or two? I have to admit that Sunday mornings are not my best time for noticing absent people. I'm busy with people who are here, those who approach me, those who need something, or those who have problems that just cannot wait. I'll admit I don't notice absences quite as soon as I should. But we have a membership care team that does a great job of keeping track who isn't present, and I'm grateful to them. But how often have the rest of us noticed when somebody isn't here and done nothing? Doing nothing is a way to say to those absent members that they don't matter to us, they don't count. Pastor Neil visits those who are unable to attend. The care team keeps track of people who are absent. I follow up with prayer concerns, hospitalizations, and surgery days. But the day that all of us decide to let the systems of the church do all the follow-up with absent people is the day that we as members begin to say that those who are absent do not count. They're the oldest son, they're not here, oops, we forgot them. Now, here's the part I really love. I'm often approached by someone asking me if I've noticed somebody hasn't been around for a while. And then the person asks if I've contacted them. And if I haven't, when am I going to do that? Well, here's my response. You contact them. If you notice they're absent, you call them. Tell me about it. But take some responsibility, because let's face it, people know that the pastor is paid to be nice. People know that the pastor is paid to call up and say, gee, we've missed you. You guys aren't. And everybody knows that. So when somebody's been absent for a while and you notice, please, 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 call them, contact them, write them a note, send a card. Tell me also, tell the membership care team, tell Pastor Neil, but for heaven's sakes, don't wait for the church systems to do something, because every time we as members don't take responsibility, we're telling those folks they don't matter. And I don't think that's the message we intend to send. Who in our larger communities do not get counted? Who have we forgotten to notice? Our Hispanic members of our community? Our African American members of our community? Our Hmong members of our community? Who have we forgotten to say, you know what, your life counts? That's what the Black Lives Matter movement is about. That's what the other Lives Matter movement is about. It's people who feel that their lives don't count because the rest of us have forgotten to take notice and say, but you do count. We've been looking for you. We don't know you yet, but we want to. Who in our workplace is it easy to overlook? Who in our classrooms is it easy to ignore? Who in our family doesn't get a lot of attention? Most of us are so busy dealing with those who cause problems, or those who are brilliant, or those who are outgoing, or those who are irregular. We forget to notice everyone who's quietly going about their lives, doing the right things without causing any drama. We celebrate the remarkable. We spend time and money on those who are slower or in trouble, but we forget how much those who are in the middle need to know that they matter to us. There was a man who had 2 sons. When it came time to celebrate, the oldest son was forgotten, and he was lost to his father from that moment on. Who have we lost? Who have we taken for granted? Who in our lives have we forgotten to count? This is a story that's designed to make us squirm. It asks, who does not count to us? It asks us to remember those whom we have forgotten. It asks us to take responsibility for our oversights. It reminds us to take no one for granted, because there was a man who had 2 sons, and he forgot the one who had stayed home and quietly done the right thing. So, how would our story start? Who in our lives? Who in our communities? Who in our families? Who have we forgotten to count? Amen.